Hey kids, do you ever feel like life has passed you by? Does the daily grind leave you feeling trapped in your own life like an animal in a cage? Well, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy some fun facts about livestock while you're at it. Today, I'll be giving a tour of the life, death, and processing of the American beef cattle. Disclaimer, this video is only a basic summary of some common industry practices. No two farms are alike, some are nicer, some are worse. I'm not a shill, please don't get mad at me. Now, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God said, "Let there be light!" And it was good. Henceforth you shall be called Craig. At birth, the calf weighs somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds. The males are typically castrated within the first couple of weeks, usually without anesthetic. The main point of this is to keep the steers mellow later in life, but it also stops their male hormones from giving the meat an off taste that the American palate isn't really accustomed to. Anyway, things started off pretty good for Craig. Drinking milk, hanging out, the life. After a while he figures out you can eat the floor, that's cool. But then after about 10 months he gets loaded into the cattle cars. If you're a history buff like me, you know that's not a good sign. Little does Craig know, he's been auctioned off to a feedlot 1,000 miles away. Here the cattle are packed together like sardines, if sardines were 500-pound terrestrial mammals. The menu consists of random roughage and energy-dense feed like corn so they can pack on the pounds more quickly. Overall, this environment puts a good deal of stress on the beast, which can end up taking a toll on his health. But it's nothing a little visit from the antibiotics fairy can't fix. Once fully grown, Craig gets taken to the packing plant. This is where the magic happens, and by magic we mean mechanically automated goring into commodities. This is where things get messy, so try to forget that we gave this random animal a name a minute ago. In order to keep things as humane as possible, a worker will first use this device, referred to as a stunner. Here's a demonstration. This renders the beast instantly unconscious, or worse, but potato at this point. Its ankle is then attached to a conveyor rail, which will gently guide the animal along the rest of its journey. First, the cow gets to talk to this man. He's called the sticker. Can you guess what he does? If you said that he gouges out throats for a living, you'd be correct. Over the course of about a minute, the flow goes from torrential downpour to incontinent poodle, by which point our beloved bovine can continue on his way. At the next station, the cow is subjected to high voltage electrical stimulation. Hopefully the nervous system is all out of steam by this point, but if not, the boys on the killing floor will have a great story to tell their wives. Haha, just kidding. The FDA estimates that 93% of meat worker marriages are in shambles. Who knew that 11 hours of pure slaughter every day could desensitize a man? Anyway, electrical stimulation basically works to speed up the onset of rigor mortis. Getting this process out of the way means the meat won't toughen up once it reaches the freezer. Next, the carcass undergoes a thorough power washing. Like the noble mortician, this hose works to make a lifetime of filth disappear. Unfortunately, though beauty is only skin deep, manure runs to the core, so the cow must be disemboweled to prevent contamination later on. And we might as well get rid of all these other gross bits while we're at it. Then the feds stick their nose in things to make sure everything is as it should be. Yup, it's a cow. Finally, we send it down the line, evacuate the spine, bifurcate the hind, reticulate the spline, and power wash it again just for good measure. This whole process, from bashing to slashing to splashing, takes a mere 15 minutes to complete. That means it takes the same amount of time to process 3 half-ton mammals and 1 scheduled license renewal. Try puzzling that one out. After hanging out in the cooler for a couple days, the beef is broken down into its many cuts: chuck, loin, sirloin, what have you. This is the good stuff. That'll get shipped off as is to barbecues, bar mitzvahs, and bargain bins all across the country. Then you got all these misfit bits hanging out wherever else. Still technically flesh, so we have machines pluck it off, pulp it, and use it to make hamburgers, hot dogs, and the like. Then all the garbage even Americans can't stomach is sent off to the rendering plant to be made into whatever else. So there you have it. I don't really have an outro, except, kinda gross, right? Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, let me ask you, do you watch the news often? Have you attended a school in your life? You ever look at $1? If the answer to any of these questions is yes, then chances are you're familiar with at least a couple United States presidents. But if you're like me prior to last week, You've probably never heard of a United States emperor. Excuse me, good sir, but I should inform you that we're actually living under an emperor as we speak, at least according to my degree from the University of Reddit. Hey, that's great. Whoa, look over there. It's someone criticizing Elon Musk. And he's making typos. Anyway, let me tell y'all a story about a man named Joshua Norton. Norton was born in England at some point in the 1810s. Very little is known about the guy's younger years other than the fact that he spent most of his youth in South Africa as part of the UK's colonization programs. He came to San Francisco in 1849 with a modest amount of wealth to his name, and worked his way up in the real estate and commodities markets to become one of the city's wealthiest citizens. All was normal in the life of Mr. Norton, until one day when he got a little too big for his britches. You see, in 1852, China was facing a huge famine, so they completely banned the export of rice. Naturally, San Fran's rice price began to skyrocket in response to the reduced supply, peaking at 36 cents per pound. Norton saw this and decided to buy a $25,000 rice shipment from Peru at 12 cents per pound, thinking he'd corner the market. Keep in mind, that's around $750,000 in today's money. Little did he know, that wasn't the only shipment coming out of Peru, and by the time he was able to sell it, rice was already back down to 3 cents a pound. Now, according to my calculations, that put Norton at a net loss of a whole frickin' lot. He subsequently got into a years-long court battle with the vendor who sold him the shipment, which only cost him more money, and ultimately left the man destitute. So, Norton did what anybody would do after losing everything. He drank a nice hefty dose of fuck it all and said, you know what? The courts can eat my shorts, the house can eat my blouse, Peru can eat my shoe. I declare myself emperor of these United States, and I'm telling every newspaper in the city about it. And then he did. Now, the papers could have just been like, what a lunatic, and that would have been the end of it. But instead they said, you know what, this guy's kind of a meme. Let's publish his declaration, just for gits and shiggles. People across the city had their laughs, and Norton's rise to power began. From here, he issued several more commands to the media, and unlike nowadays, people loved having regular Norton updates shoved in their face. Among these announcements was a decree in 1859 to formally abolish the United States Congress. He also gave out a mandate to both the Protestant and Roman Catholic churches to formally ordain him as emperor. Although these edicts were ultimately ignored by the powers they were addressed to, they still served to build Norton's reputation around the city, and before long he was a fully fledged local celebrity. He was easily recognized by passerby, typically sporting a blue naval uniform and a beaver hat with a peacock feather in it. Pretty soon, Norton could expect to receive the royal treatment wherever he went. People started to address him formally on the streets, he got to ride public transport for free, and he even got occasional tax payments from people sympathetic to his impoverished living situation. Oh, and get this, Norton became so famous that toy stores in the city began selling dolls of the man for kids to play with. How many people can you think of that were so legendary that they got dolls made after them? You got Emperor Norton, Mr. T, and the bear that Teddy Roosevelt decided not to shoot. That's it, really. Also, though not backed by actual law in any way, his declarations came to be taken relatively seriously by the populace around him. For example, according to Norton, saying Frisco instead of San Francisco would be punishable by a $25 fine. Talk to any Frisco native and you'll find that this attitude survives to this day. With the help of a local printing firm, Norton even issued his own currency, which was actually accepted by many residents of the city, despite having no backing behind it whatsoever. In fact, a few Norton bucks are still floating around today as highly valued collector's items. I tried doing the same thing a while back, but unfortunately, Nella rubles are still only worth their weight in Nella rubles. Of course, it wasn't all magpies and molasses for our good friend Josh. He was once arrested by a policeman named Armand Barbier, who wanted to throw him in an asylum for his apparent insanity. Needless to say, when the public caught wind of this, they lost their fucking minds. Irate citizens wrote complaints in droves. All the newspapers published scathing editorials towards the police department. Stray cats were thrown into wood chippers. I don't have any evidence for that last one. I'm just, assuming based on what I would do in this scenario. Anyway, pretty soon, the chief of police got the memo, and Emperor Norton was released unscathed. Thankfully, Norton issued a royal pardon towards the man who arrested him, and from that point onward, whenever Norton passed a member of the force, they would stop and salute him. So, although in many ways he appeared godlike, Norton was but a mortal, and, as mortals sometimes do, Emperor Norton decided to drop dead on a street corner on January 8th of 1880. However, he left behind a legacy the likes of which most of us could only dream of. Beyond just the comedic value of his many exploits, Norton definitely had his prophetic moments, with some of his orders actually coming true decades after they were given. On multiple occasions, he ordered a bridge to be built between San Francisco and the Oakland Bay Area, which was eventually constructed in the 1930s. He also told people to form a League of Nations to uphold international interests. Unfortunately, a man yelling in California wasn't quite enough to convince the leaders of the world that such a thing was necessary. But who knows? Maybe little Nordo could have stopped World War I if he had been just a bit louder. I hope this tale has inspired some of you young impressionable kids out there, not because I expect any of you to succeed in the same way Norton did, but just because it's my personal belief that the world could always use more oddball vagrants. Wait a minute. Oddball vagrants. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching.
Hey kids, hope you had yourself a merry little whatever. I know I did. What do you like best about the holiday experience? My personal favorite part is where we systemically brainwash children into thinking they're supernatural beings who judge their every move and then invade their house at night. Now, everyone knows Santa. Good old Saint Nick. Ol' Father Christmas, ol' Christopher Kringle, ol' Elpheus Prime, slayer of elk and bringer of Xboxes. And you've probably heard of some other characters somewhere too. Guys like Krampus, Belsnickel, Charlie Brown, Xi Jinping. Well, today I want to show you guys some more obscure Yuletide beings from different cultures all across the globe, but mostly Europe. Now, this first creature's name comes from the Welsh. As a matter of moral principle, I personally don't formally recognize the Welsh language. Maybe someday they'll figure out how W's and Y's work, then it'll be a different story, but for the time being, you'll have to excuse me for not condoning bullshit like this. So the thing allegedly called Mari Lwyd isn't a true mythical creature per se, but more so a tradition carried out for at least the past few centuries in South Wales. No, I mean Old South Wales. This is how it works. Every holiday season, the village rapscallion will take a horse's skull and affix it to the end of a pole. Kinda like one of these things, except, awful. The skull is typically decorated in some way, and sometimes they put in a lever so you can make the mouth move on its own. Then a white sheet is draped over the pole and its holder, thus giving the illusion that Famine himself has come to destroy all your figgy pudding. From here, one would think that the nightly festivities would include welshing your trousers and repenting for a lifetime of naughtiness, but no, it gets better. You know that whole mouth-moving thing? Turns out that's not just for taking wild snaps at the faces of innocent children. The Mari Lwyd and its party of caretakers will go around to random houses and sing a song about wanting to be let inside. The inhabitants are then expected to sing back with excuses as to why they don't want this abomination in their home. All in rhyme, of course. This goes back and forth until either the Mari Lwyd gives up, or the party's invited in, at which point they get to raid your pantry and drink all your beer. So if you ever find yourself rap battling a horse skull in South Wales, don't panic. It's normal, I guess. Next we have Frau Perchta, a witch-like being said to visit during the holidays in the Alpine regions of Germany and Austria. Depictions of Perchta can range anywhere between beautiful woman and whatever the hell this is, but usually they fall somewhere in between. She's also sometimes shown with this big weird floppy goose foot. That's because she's apparently real into spinning. Not the 2-foot kind though, the 1-foot kind. It's said that this delightful spinster pays a visit to all the little wiener schnitzels on the 12th night of Christmas. If you were well behaved and hard working this year, she might leave you a small silver coin in your shoe. How kind. But if you've been an inattentive young lady and didn't spin all your flax that year, Perchta will trample all your half-woven fibers as punishment, and you'll say, weird flax, but okay. Fucking cut that out, Jesus. Then there's the stuff Perchta considers especially naughty, which can vary depending on who you ask. If you left your house a mess, or you didn't leave out the traditional bowl of porridge, or maybe you didn't eat your ceremonial fish and gruel on feast day, that's when you've been a real goober. As recompense, she'll rip out your fucking intestines through your abdominal wall and then stuff your empty body cavity with pebbles and straw until you're just as plump as when she started. So, you win some, you lose some. Nobody knows what she does with your freshly harvested innards after she leaves. But being that she lives in the mountains and has an obsession with thread making, I think we can all infer the obvious truth. Of course, no discussion of folklore of any kind can truly be complete without taking a look at Iceland.
Between the centuries of isolation and the volcanic fumes constantly spilling out over the countryside, it's no wonder that they're one of the world's biggest exporters of whack-ass mythology. Seriously, according to one 1998 survey, over 54% of Icelandic citizens said they believed in elves. Let me repeat that just so we're all clear. In 1998, the majority of the population of Iceland said they believed in elves, and a very large portion probably still does today. As such, the cast of characters said to visit during the holiday season over there is naturally quite diverse. The main lineup consists of the family pictured here. This is the leader of the bunch, a troll, goblin, ogreish type lady named Grilla. Grilla just fucking eats kids. That's it. She's said to prefer the naughty ones, but as long as it's small and made out of kid, she's game. Then you got her husband, Lepalu, who lives with her in her cave, generally considered to be equally ogreish. When the holidays roll around, if there's no soot in your fireplace, he'll reward you with a pickled herring. But if it's dirty, he'll scoop up the ash and dump it in your bed. Ooh. Nah, just messing with you. None of that's true. He also just eats children. The couple also has a giant cat called, this. The cat's main concern is whether or not a person received new clothes for Christmas. Pretty hypocritical considering it walks around naked all the time, but whatever. Anyway, if you got new clothes, then good for you. You got new clothes. On the other hand, if you didn't get any, well, can you guess what he does? You want to take a wild stab? Yeah, that's exactly right. He fucking eats you. Children, adults, doesn't matter. He'll even vor your dog. He doesn't care. Finally, you got the best of the bunch, the 13 Yule lads, each of which visits on a different day leading up to Christmas. They're kind of like the 7 dwarves, but whereas those guys are jolly and helpful and stupid shit like that, the only real goal of the Yule lads is to harass and inconvenience people as much as possible, and each one has a unique way that they go about doing that. I'm going to go through all 13. Now please remember, I am making none of this up. I'm not even going to try to say the Icelandic names, so I'll just give you guys the English translations, which are very apt, by the way. First you got Sheepcoat Clod, who goes around harassing sheep, but he's easy to catch on account of his peg legs. Then there's Gully Gulk, who hides in gullies to steal milk from your cows. There's Stubby, he's real short. He eats the leftover crust out of pie pans. This one's called Spoon Licker, he licks spoons. He's also incredibly thin on account of malnutrition for some reason. There's Pot Scraper, he scrapes pots. And Bowl Licker, who's like Spoon Licker. The key difference here being that he licks bowls. You got Door Slammer, who slams doors in the middle of the night. And then Skyr Gobbler, who gobbles up all your skyr, which is like a Nordic yogurt type thing. Whoa, who's that up in the rafters? It's Sausage Swiper, of course. Here to swipe your sausages. And who's that in the windows? You bet your ass it's Window Peeper. Look at him peep. And who could forget our favorite, Doorway Sniffer, who sniffs your doorway with his giant freakish nose to seek out bread. There's Meat Hook, he steals your meat with a hook. And finally, Candle Stealer, who fucking, you get the picture. So, if you know some kids who just won't behave, maybe it's time to take a page out of Iceland's book come next holiday season. Now remember, your friend dressed up as Grilla doesn't have to actually eat the kids. Just bite him a couple times, that'll be enough. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Nah, but seriously, fuck Swift the Cockatiel. Look at this ugly tree-sniffing idiot. I hope he gets AIDS. I mean it. Hey kids, the human spirit is a very powerful thing. With the right temperament, it can allow us to survive things you wouldn't believe. However, some people are stronger than others. For example, I've never so much as broken a bone in my life. Haven't been hospitalized since that first time 20 years ago. So I'm like 90% certain if I'm ever forced to dance with death, my soul's pussying out to the great beyond first thing. On the other end of the spectrum, you got guys like Phineas Gage. Gage was a 25-year-old railroad worker in mid-19th century Vermont. He and his crew were busy gang blasting rock to prepare the roadbed for a newly planned route. This involves a big hole being drilled into the ground, filled with gunpowder, and packed down using a tamping iron. Well, being the gentleman and scholar that he is, Gage decides to lean forward and look directly into the hole, right? Now, the first rule of gun safety is to never look down the front of a gun. Everyone knows that. Gage basically just turned the earth into a gun and decided to put his head right in front of its gaping barrel, and wouldn't you know it, the powder goes off. The tamping iron shoots up into his cheek, moseys right on through his frickin' brain, and goes soaring out the other side, landing 80 feet away, all smeared with blood and
thought juice. Now by and large, Gage should have dropped dead immediately and been thrown into a ravine for his blatant disregard for OSHA regulations, and that would have been the end of it. But I guess Shiva Gautama Christ-chan, the one true god, decided Gage still had unfinished business down here on Shit Outta Luck 3, because after a few minutes of twitching on the ground, he got up, looked around, and thought, well, now's a good time as any for my yearly checkup. According to the doctor he went to, while Gage was retelling the story of what happened, he suddenly started vomiting all over the place, the effort of which, and I quote, pushed out about half a teacupful of the brain, which fell upon the floor. He didn't say what they did with it after. I'm picturing his dog just running over and immediately scarfing it down, then being plagued with the memories of a human railroad worker for the rest of his life. In the months following, Gage made a near complete recovery, physically anyway. He did lose a bit of his mind, which caused him to lose his mind a bit. Whereas Gage was once an upstanding, hardworking citizen, his untimely brain blast transformed him into an angry, incoherent drunkard, mumbling, quote, the grossest profanity whenever he deemed fit, and showing little to no regard for human life whatsoever. Naturally, he was fired from his job at the railroad, so Gage ended up wandering the earth, earning money any way he could. For a while, he hung out at Barnum's American Museum in New York City, basically making an exhibit of himself, standing there with a tamping iron like, hi, this went through my brain. Bye! He later had a stint as a farmhand in California and a stagecoach driver in Chile, which, I don't know who let the guy with severe brain trauma and no depth perception drive a vehicle, but whatever. Over time, he actually became a lot more functional, until finally, 10 years later, when his brain remembered, oh yeah, I shouldn't exist, leading to Gage having a bunch of seizures and dying at age 36. A similar story happened with one Ron Hunt in 2003. He was an American construction worker who was drilling a hole above his head, when the ladder he was standing on decided to give way, leading to Hunt landing face first on a 1.5-inch auger drill bit. The drill went straight through his left eye and out the back of his skull. To give you a reference of what 1.5 inches of drill looks like, here's the actual x-ray that doctors took when Hunt arrived at the hospital. Miraculously, the drill ended up just kind of pushing his brain out of the way, leading to no cognitive impairment whatsoever. Matter of fact, Hunt was perfectly lucid while the doctors tried to figure out the best way to take the thing out of his head. Initially, they considered cutting it out, but that would have been too messy, so eventually they decided to literally just unscrew it from his head, like, alright, hold him still now. Oh, you fucking MILF. Lefty loosey. Does that mean the top or the bottom? What? It's a rotating circle. And? Okay, you hold on for 1 sec. Look, one way the top goes left, one way the bottom. So which? Clearly the one on top. Why? Tell me why. Why clearly? Same reason north is up on the map. It's just common practice. Alright, well sorry for not subscribing to your Eurocentric propaganda, Dan. You soggy cunt. Anyway, what were we doing? If you think Hunt was just a little too lucky with his incident, don't worry. According to Snopes, he was self-employed and didn't have insurance, so while the accident didn't ruin his life, you can sleep easy knowing that hundreds of thousands of dollars of medical bills and rehabilitation costs probably did. Our next tale revolves around Greg Rasmussen, a British-born animal conservationist who was studying wildlife in Zimbabwe. One day, he got reports of a highly endangered rhino being spotted in the area, so Greg took to the skies in a single-passenger plane to track the beast. Fate was looking down at Greg that day, and after a moment, it said, "No, rhino must die." And a huge gust of wind came out of nowhere, sending Greg into a tailspin, crash landing right in the middle of the untamed African bush. When Greg woke up, he found that his legs looked like used up tubes of toothpaste, so he was essentially trapped right where he was. Arguably worse than that was the fact that Greg was dehydrated before he even took off, hoping to get water at his destination. And just when things looked like they couldn't get any worse, they got worse. A group of elephants showed up and started harassing and straight up stampeding at Greg. With no other option, he starts banging on the wreckage as hard as he could. The elephants went, "Ha!" and decided to leave him alone. He was also approached by a pack of hyenas and actual lionesses on the hunt. But fortunately, animals are all morons, so the same trick worked on them too. Greg spent an entire day and night pinned under the wreckage, fighting off wildlife, severe dehydration, and extreme temperatures before finally being rescued the next morning. Incredibly, after over 100 operations, doctors managed to get Greggy's leggies up and running again. Although he was now 3 inches shorter, which is probably for the best, because now they can just stick the keys to the plane on top of the fridge so he never has another incident like this again. So moral of the story, us humans are resilient creatures who will do anything in our power to survive. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Gage was a 25-year-old railroad worker. Railroad.
Hey kids, time to talk about more cases of stiff lifting from the days of yore. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, go check it out. Or don't. I'm a YouTuber, not a cop, unfortunately. This first tale doesn't feature an entire dead body, but I still found it interesting enough to talk about. So one day in 2012, a priest was riding a train out of Italy when his bag got stolen by a trio of thieves. Inside the bag was whatever normal personal possessions the guy happened to own, as well as a small vial containing the blood of none other than Pope John Paul II. So this begs the question, why did the priest have Pope blood in his bag? Well, an important way that the Catholic Church honors saints and other venerated individuals is the keeping of relics. These relics are ranked in terms of how close they were to the person at hand. You got something that's tangentially related to a saint in any way, that's a third-class relic. If it's a personal possession of a saint, it's second class. And as for first-class relics, those typically consist of literal body parts and or fluids of a holy figure. Now for you youngsters out there, in 1981, the Pope got shot 4 times by some fascist having a bad day. People are like, holy shit, it's a popicide! Is that even a word? No, I'm okay. Oh. Say, who left all this first-class relic lying around? So to this day, there remain 3 objects containing the fine-aged poppy juice spilled that fateful afternoon. The vial was found a few hours later by police among the reeds and grass near the station, which basically means the thieves took one look at it and were like, blood? I already make this myself. Lame. And tossed it out without a second thought. Here's the thing though, that's not the only instance of old JP2 getting blood napped. In 2014, a similar relic was yoinked from the church of San Pietro della Ienca in Italy alongside a crucifix. The fact that these were the only items taken led to 2 prevailing theories. Some people thought that, since John Paul II wasn't technically a saint yet, the relic's value would go way up once the man was actually canonized, so the thieves decided to take it now and resell it later. The other theory was way more popular with the media. After all, what use does Pope blood have other than satanic rituals? This story naturally got a lot of press, and the whole world just kind of assumed that Lucifer himself was set to return any day now. Eventually, the thieves confessed, so authorities came to the rehab facility they were staying at. They returned the cross, but when questioned about the relic, they were like, wait, what? Pope blood? Satan? Do you guys need to check in here too? Eventually, it was found in a rubbish bin on the facility grounds, which means once again, it was just casually tossed out as nonsense. You ever throw out Pope blood? Because apparently, multiple people have done that on separate occasions just in the past 7 years. It doesn't end there, of course. In 2016, this happened a 3rd time when a piece of cloth with John Paul fluid on it was taken from Cologne Cathedral. I can't for the life of me find a follow-up to this story, which leads me to believe that they're just like, fuck it, Pope blood's more trouble than it's worth at this point. But if you guys can find some conclusion to where it ended up, let me know below. Now, our next story begins with a man named Karl Tanzler, a German-born radiology technologist in early 20th century Florida. He looked kinda like Sigmund Freud, except even more evil looking. On the inside, he was a pretty normal dude, other than the fact that he claimed to have visions throughout his life of some mysterious dark-haired girl. Anyway, in 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, he met a young woman by the name of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, called Elena for short, and he said, "Oh my god, that's the girl from the visions I've been having." Yeah, wait, what? "We were meant to meet today. We must be soulmates." What? Don't you have like a wife and 2 kids? Destiny. Hoyos was soon diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was considered fatal at the time, so naturally Karl decided to handle her treatment, going as far as convincing her family to let him visit their home every day. Except he was a radiologist, so even if there were reliable means to treat tuberculosis at the time, he definitely didn't have the credentials to do so. But whatever, this is the past we're talking about after all. That place was a shit show from start to finish. I'm not about to get on somebody's case for a little clerical error. In addition to whatever salves and tinctures and such doctors gave to people back then, Tanzler showered her with gifts of clothes and jewelry. I know he meant well, but if I was bedridden with a terminal illness, I'd just be insulted. Like, wow, thanks, can't wait to show off this little number out on the town. Anyway, eventually, Tanzler found that the time had come to reveal his true feelings. "Elena, there's something I must confess. I'm deeply in love with you." "I'm so glad you feel the same." Hoyos inevitably succumbed to the disease, leaving Tanzler heartbroken. He just wasn't ready to part ways with his pestilence-riddled sweetheart, so he asked the family's permission to commission an above-ground mausoleum for their daughter. And since this was the early 20th century, they said, What a sweet, selfless man. I'm sure he'd never do this just so he could commit crimes against nature. Then he was like, oh yeah, by the way, could I have some of her hair too? Sure, kind stranger. Here's a bag of her hair we just had lying around for some fucking reason. Again, no red flags here. He went to visit her dwelling nearly every night for 2 years. Then finally one day he said, you know what, kid? You're alright. Say, how's about we ditch this musty old mausoleum and go back to my place? I'll take that as a yes. So he took her home in a little red toy wagon, which is ridiculous. It makes me picture him skipping around, whistling a merry tune. Hey neighbor! Now here's a riddle for all you intellectuals out there. What do a dead body and a used PT Cruiser have in common? Sure, they both taste terrible, and you never want to be seen in public with one. Most importantly though, they're a depreciating asset. But hey, that didn't stop old Gnarly Carly from sprucing her up any way he could. Wiring her bones back together with coat hangers, replacing her skin with wax and silk, making a wig out of that bag of hair from earlier, and soaking the body in massive amounts of perfume and disinfectants, for obvious reasons. He claimed to have been instructed to do all this by Elena's spirit, which he would apparently talk to frequently. He also did, you know, that thing eccentric loners do with dead ladies in their house, but we won't talk about that. This went on for 7 years, 7 hot and humid Florida years, until 1940 when Elena's sister saw him dancing with some lady through the curtains. She's like, aw, how cute. I'm glad that old bag of lentils has finally found love. Walks in, comes to find out it's her fucking dead sister. So the cops come, but there isn't any conclusive evidence of any flirting and philandering with the body, so the only crime Carl could have been charged with was grave robbing. Except the statute of limitations was already up by the time he was found out, so they just took the body, tipped their hats, and went on their merry way. Tanzler still missed Elena dearly, but since he couldn't have her cadaver, he crafted a crude homemade effigy of the lady, which he lived with for the rest of his life. Here's the part that really gets me though. He apparently went back to live with his estranged wife once the jig was up. Just like, hey babe, I know we haven't talked since the whole corpse thing, but I've been having trouble making rent. Do you think I could come crash for a while? Sure, come right in. I'll take your coats. Would you and the demented life-size replica of your long-dead lover that you left me for like a cup of tea? I'd like one. None for her though. It goes right through her. Of course, I'm making all this out to be a horrifying thing for the goofs and gaffs of it, but at the time, a lot of people read the news stories about Tanzler, and many actually sympathized with the man. They saw him as the distraught, hapless romantic that he saw himself as. You know why they had that compassion? Because they listened. Say, what would the world look like if we all listened more? Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and thank you for watching. Hey kids, as we all know, the evolution of species is an incredible process, driven by little more than the random chance that certain mutations may happen to provide a practical advantage in a creature's environment. And as a result, there's a lot of things out there that look super dumb once you strip back a few layers. Here's the top 10 worst animal skeletons of all time. So first and foremost, I'd like to settle a little debate I've been seeing floating around the past few weeks. Yes, penguins do, in fact, have knees, but in order to hide full-grown legs into one plump cylinder, you gotta have a little skeletal trickery on your side. You guys ever do wall sits in gym class or elsewhere? One of the most torturous exercises out there. I now feel even worse for penguins, because not only did they have to deal with living in a frigid black and white hellscape, the most hostile environment known to man second only to the vacuum of space, all the while constantly pursued by ravenous bloodthirsty sea dogs, but they're also secretly doing wall sits their entire life. Quick side note, in Mandarin, the word for penguin consists of the characters for business goose, which is fucking hilarious. Like one day a goose put on a suit and said, "Today it is time to make a name for myself, honk." This next guy is known as Parsons chameleon, found in the more remote regions of Madagascar. Notice the fleshy protuberances around its nose area. Turns out, not fleshy, not even remotely fleshy, not even one flesh. Instead, it just has a skull forever frozen in time in the middle of exploding, like it sneezed right in the middle of God shaping it out of clay, and he was just like, ah, whatever, it's a feature now. So for that, this rough-headed reptilian gets number 9. Normally I would have ranked it higher, but that's a dope tale, so he gets some pity points. Next is the pufferfish. So for most of my life, I've pictured pufferfish as just not having any bones. I know it doesn't really make sense, but neither does them turning into a balloon like a goddamn cartoon. Turns out, in their normal state, they actually look like this, and when they inflate, those concentric rings of spines slide outwards past one another to cover the full area, like the aperture
aperture of a camera lens expanding to cover the full frame of the fish. The sheer ingenuity of this design has shattered my childhood dream of real-life balloon animals, which has earned the pufferfish the number 8 spot on this list. Now, if you've gotten around to certain zoological circles, you've been shown this skull and been told, ah yes, that comes from the dwarf elephant. Oh, you've never seen one? That's because they're extinct. And that thing in the middle? Ah yes, nothing more than the nose hole to which the trunk connects. However, if you're a rational, free-thinking adult like me, you can look past the lies spoon-fed to you by Nat Geo and other liberal media outlets and see this for what it is. A cyclops. Next is the orca, otherwise known as the killer whale, the panda torpedo, or the SeaWorld slave. Its skeleton is fairly normal at first glance, but check out this little thing under here. That little bony blip is actually all that remains of the legs and pelvis of the orca from when it evolved from land mammals. Personally, I think that's highly disrespectful to their ancestors. Like, they could have taken the seal route and used those legs for good in the water, but instead these sea cowards said, no thanks, we're gonna undo all that evolution and just be bigger, smarter, warmer fish again. But hey, we'll keep this little piece of nothing just to remember you guys by. Truthfully, I could have chosen almost any cetacean to pick on for this, but the orca's face also reminds me of SCP-682, which is the most OP overrated shit out there, so he gets the number 6 spot. Moving on, now bear with me here. In every other mammal on Earth, the canine teeth point downward from the gum to the mouth. You know, like a tooth. But this guy, known as the Babirusa, said, huh, and decided to have them grow up through the entirety of its fucking snoot and out the other end, which is the most nonsensical thing I've ever seen. Like, toenails out the front? How cliche. Let's make them go through the whole foot instead. Look, now I can kick good behind me. That's not all though. These tusks also keep growing for the creature's entire life, which isn't a problem in and of itself, right? Rodents, they keep chewing stuff to wear them down. Alligators, they just let them fall out now and then. But the Babirusa's like, pfft, I'll just nut in a lady pig long before this becomes an issue. So if it lives long enough, the teeth can curve right on around and slowly bore into the thing's face, like built-in Chinese bamboo torture. And occasionally, they can end up actually piercing the skull and shish kebabbing the brain. Now some people might say that this doesn't belong on this list, given that teeth aren't technically bones. And to those people, kids, we say, eat shit and die. Next we have the octopus. The octopus skeleton is so bad that it doesn't even exist. Sure, they got this little thing in the middle, but that doesn't count, that's just chitin. And yeah, they can get in a jar or whatever, but at what cost? At the animal picnics, the crowd shouts, bleh, shun the spineless freak. And at the animal wheelbarrow races, with nothing to grab hold of, the cephalopod holds a solitary vigil at the starting line. And lo, the octopus wins naught but a participant medal at the Grand Prix, and the number 4 spot on this list. Moving on, here's the skeleton of a fruit bat. Now, not a big deal to us regular folk, but imagine if humans had no context of bats and they dug this thing up. Like, class, archaeologists have recently found these fossilized remains, and using modern technology, we can see exactly what it would have looked like back when it was alive. This abominable creature is known only to scientists as Finger Boy, and is theorized to have fed upon fruit, insects, and the dreams of orphans, which it would siphon out from the ears of the errant little waifs whilst they slumbered. By the way, if you Google image bat skeleton, like, more than half of them have the ears built in, just like, I feel the extraordinarily bat-like wings and figure of our decoration are much too subtle for our consumers. Better slap these on. At number 2, we have the anteater. From its oboe-like skull to its gorilla fist and hands, one can only wonder who let this creature exist. Fun fact, if you take the anteater's skull and blow into its nose, it plays a beautiful song recounting the animal's entire life, and then security escorts you out of the museum. Looking at this, I can only pose the question asked for generations long before my own. That being, why the long face? Before we get to the number 1 spot, here's a few honorable mentions. The wolf eel. The ostrich. This human-cat hybrid I found on a tabloid site. And of course, the mermaid. So at our number 1 spot, we have this creature. That's supposed to be a mirror. I know most of you can't see yourself in it on account of your filthy Dorito-smeared screens, so just take my word for it. So what's wrong with humans, you ask? Well, a lot of things, but for now let's stick to the skeleton. First off, these bones right here, these are known as the metatarsals. All part of the foot, right? No, that's a bunch of primate propaganda. In most other groups of land mammals, what we'd consider our ankles is actually the quote-unquote knee of the animal. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Also, it's estimated that around 80% of people will experience chronic back pain at some point in their life. Thanks a lot, walking upright. Lastly, probably something you've heard about at some point, our skull to pelvis ratio. For most animals, giving birth, not a big deal. Small heads, wide hips, mazel tov. But check out the big brain on Brett. Throws a real monkey wrench in the works there. For a while, it led to some problems till those extra brains figured out how to work around it. So I guess you win this round, humans. But that doesn't stop you from also winning the #1 spot on the worst skeletons of all time. But hey, just cause you'll forever be flawed on the inside doesn't mean you can't improve yourself on the outside. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I'm still scared of swine flu. Hey kids, now some philosophers have called boats the airplanes of the sea, but while every glamorous Glennis has its slow-mo shun, so too does JJ the Jetplane have his awful counterpart. Her legacy in many ways resembles my middle school career, a 3-year-long travesty plagued by blunder after blunder due to both gross incompetence and sheer misfortune, with the only silver lining being that it's remembered by relatively few. Meet the USS William D. Porter, nicknamed the Willie D, which was a perfectly acceptable alias in the days before Don't Ask, Don't Tell. She was a Fletcher-class destroyer, which, if you know Fletcher as well as I do, you know he's pretty high-class at destroying. Like when he snapped off my DS screen during summer camp because he was trying to get a better look. Didn't even apologize. He was just like, well, you're not supposed to bring video games to camp anyway. Even though everyone did. Fuck you, Fletcher. You were a counselor. You're supposed to be more mature than us. You're the reason I grew up with a lingering resentment towards authority. And my only reprisal is that I got to draw you as a disgusting fat lard for millions of people. Actually, I think his name might have been Eric. Anyway, in July of 1943, the ship was commissioned by the Navy and led by Lieutenant Commander Wilfred A. Walter. As her first real job, the Willie D was assigned to a top-secret escort mission across the Atlantic. Walter was like, alright man, time to prove ourselves. I want to see you all on your A-game. And as its first act under military command, the ship didn't raise anchor properly and tore a massive chunk out of the ship next to it while pulling out. Okay, rough start, but definitely not a sign of things to come. The next day, she met up with 3 other ships, including 2 destroyers and a battleship known as the USS Iowa, and the fleet set off towards Africa. Given the clandestine nature of the operation, they were ordered to maintain total radio silence so as not to alert any subs that might be lurking below. Suddenly, boom, bang, borf, Hare Krishna, huge explosion off the starboard quarter. They're like, holy shit, evasive maneuvers. But after however many minutes, the transmission comes in saying, hi, this is Wilfred D. of the Willie Walter. So a depth charge may have accidentally fallen off the ship, and we may have also forgotten to turn off the safety mechanisms on said charge, causing it to detonate immediately. So if you heard a little noise a bit ago, no cause for alarm. Also, sorry for breaking radio silence. Love you, bye. Shortly thereafter, a strange phenomenon was spotted near the ship. Officer, what in the rhyme of the ancient fuck is that? Appears to be a large wave, sir. Jesus Christ, they have that now? Basically everything that wasn't tied down ended up being swept off, and one of the boilers in the engine room got foobarred. But fortunately, no crew members were taken away, except for the one that was. Later, the 4 ships congregated in the waters east of Bermuda when the Iowa decided to test its anti-air abilities and launched a bunch of weather balloons for target practice. A few of these drifted towards the Willie D, and they took some potshots just for fun, probably wrecking some happy albatross households in the process. But Walter was like, men, it's time to redeem ourselves. Spit those crayons out. Don't you know the purple ones are bad for you? Time for some impromptu torpedo drills on the Iowa. Yay! That was Narnar and the Pow Pow. They're gonna douse their trousers when they see how good we tore those pedos. Say, you guys remember to take the primer out of all of them before launching, right? Yes, sir. Yep. What? Fortunately, the Iowa didn't really have much valuable cargo that could be damaged in the event that the torpedo struck. Oh, except for 32nd President of the United States Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was being escorted to Cairo as the whole point of the mission. The next 5 minutes aboard the Willie D were just total fucking chaos. Humid sacks of rice, hogs and bats sniffing each other, massive stereos. Commander, we really should radio them. No! I am not breaking any more rules! Do the flashy light thing! Hey, incoming signal from old Iron Brains, a yuck. They're saying they're, going to reverse at full speed? What? Shit off a bowsprit, this ain't working! Fine, call him! FaceTime, oovo, I don't give a hoot! The transmission arrived in the nick of time, and the torpedo detonated a safe distance away in the Iowa's wake. Of course, that didn't stop the entire crew of the Willie D from being arrested for, shooting a torpedo at the president. Lawton Dawson, the Elmer's eater from earlier, was initially sentenced to 14 years hard labor, till FDR came out and was like, no, it's okay. Boys will be boys. But we are sending you and the rest of Carnival Cruise Line to Alaska where there's fewer things things to ruin by being yourself. Get it, Carnival Cruise Line? Because you're the worst. And also clowns. So they kicked it for a while in the Aleutians, otherwise known as the tale of the pregnant rat that makes up Alaska. This went on mostly without incident, except for when they were anchored outside an officer's home during a New Year's Eve party, and a sailor got drunk and decided to fire off one of the 5-inch guns for a laugh, and ended up sending a bunch of his geranium straight to hell where they belong. Other than that, smooth sailing. Then they hung out at the Philippines for a bit before Central Command was like, alright, looks like you smoothskins are ready for actual missions again. Except you're going to clown college. And the Willie D was sent to the Battle of Okinawa under the leadership of some guy named Charles. Here they actually did some worthwhile stuff until June 10th, 1945, when a kamikaze began to dive towards them. They weren't able to shoot it down, probably because it wasn't American, but it crashed in the water some ways away. They were like, phew, crisis averted, turned their attention elsewhere, unintentionally driving right over where the bomber landed. The plane was like, the hell? Oh, shit, that's right. Bonsai. About 3 hours of desperate repairs went by before the order to abandon ship was given, and miraculously, every crew member made it out alive by the time the ship sank, just 12 minutes later. So it just goes to show, everything has its silver lining. Everyone on the dipship gets to live, every filthy Chuck E. Cheese ball pit has a delicious prize at the bottom, and the vast nexus of pointless diversions we call the internet actually has a couple productive things to do on it too. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I'm a fellow with rubella.
Hey kids, John Wilkes Booth, Lee Harvey Oswald, Hitler, all people who gained massive notoriety by killing one of history's famous leaders. But there are two Americans who committed an equally heinous crime as these three, yet their stories are seldom remembered, mostly because nobody really cares about the presidents they killed. Originally I was going to talk about both of them, but the video ended up being way too long, so today we'll just stick to, this one I guess. Charles J. Guiteau was a pretty silly guy, and to understand how a guy could be so silly, you gotta start with his youth. Guiteau was born in Freeport, Illinois in 1841. His mom had postpartum psychosis and died when he was 7, alongside 3 of his 5 siblings. His dad, meanwhile, was mega religious and made a big point out of instilling those values in his son, often physically. This influence molded Charles into a boy who sought nothing short of total approval from others and who would react very harshly to any criticism levied upon him. As a teen, he moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan for high school. He tried to get into the University of Michigan, but he goofed on the entrance exam. So he did what anyone in his situation would do and said, well, so much for real life. I'm gonna join a commune. Specifically, he became part of the Oneida community in New York. In some aspects, this place was a pretty run-of-the-mill religious fellowship. From each according to their ability, to each according to their need, yada yada. But there were a couple of things that made it special. First off, they followed a doctrine known as Christian perfectionism, whereby everyone would strive to live their lives completely free of sin and reach a divine level of perfection while still on earth. Now this isn't really unique to Oneida, but whereas most people would achieve this through staunch discipline and careful self-reflection, these guys would just get together and take turns roasting the shit out of each and every member over any minute flaw they could possibly have. Real great for the psyche. They also practiced what was basically an early form of eugenics, where aspiring parents would have to submit an application and be judged by the committee on their moral and spiritual fortitude. If they were allowed to mate, children would be separated from the mom about a year after birth and raised communally in the children's wing. After all, wouldn't want any of those hopelessly flawed toddlers to think they're deserving of any affection whatsoever. Oneida also believed in what they called free love, which meant that anyone could bang anyone at any time, as long as they kept it hetero, and exclusive relationships of any kind were actually frowned upon, which seems like kind of a weird habit for people trying to 100% FC this whole Christianity thing, but whatever. But wait, you're saying, how can you have selective breeding at the same time as extremely unselective breeding? Aha! See, that's where male continence comes in. Under this rule, a pair could go at it for as long as they wanted, with the caveat that the dude's not allowed to nut, pull out or otherwise. That way, it's not a sin. After all, as the Bible says, if the dick don't spit, you must acquit. Paradoxically, no such rule existed for the women. In fact, not only did the commune believe in female orgasms, they actually prioritized them, which is like unheard of in the 19th century. They'd even have the middle-aged women of the society train the teen boys in the art of holding in in the old pelvic sneeze. That way, there wouldn't be any chance of conception in case the guy goofs up his first few tries. So anyway, young Gito joins this whole thing, and endured countless blows to his massive yet fragile ego, thinking he's at least gonna get a piece of this communal action. Except, the criticism towards him wasn't just a formality like it was for others. Everyone there genuinely fucking hated him, on account of the fact that he was a raving neurotic narcissist. He never caught a single piece of this allegedly free love, and after a while, they all started calling him Charles Get Out in the hopes that he'd leave. This is real. And after 5 long years of this abuse, Gito finally got the hint and moved to New Jersey. He tried starting a newspaper themed around the Oneida religion called the Daily Theocrat, except nobody cared, so that failed. He went back to Oneida and tried to sue the place in order to get back pay for all his voluntary unpaid labor while living there, but apparently I'm mad butthurt isn't a valid reason for prosecution, so that went nowhere. Finally he said, well, when your devotion to God has failed you, there's only one path in life left. Time to become a lawyer. He managed to pass an examination to gain admission to the Illinois bar, and subsequently joined a law firm in Chicago at the age of 27, where he met his soon-to-be wife, one Annie Bunn. Of course, Gito never really got to be a lawyer. He only argued in one actual court case. Most of his time was spent doing bill collection for random clients. This job gave him insight into how debtors think and operate, which allowed him to turn into quite the con man, dodging bills whenever and wherever he saw the opportunity. Even on the job, he'd frequently charge exorbitant contingency fees after the fact, upwards of 75%. And sometimes he'd just keep it all and completely ghost his clients. After all, what are they gonna do? Send another bill collector? Well, it turns out they did, so Gito and his wife fled to New York. Here he ditched law and started getting into politics. Specifically, he wrote and delivered a speech in favor of Horace Greeley, the 1872 Democratic presidential candidate. And he somehow got it in his head that if Greeley won, his campaign would be so greatly indebted to him that they'd fulfill his desires to be the Minister of Chile, as though a total rando like him could just, name a job and it would be his. In reality, the speech was an incoherent mess heard by next to no one, and Greeley lost by a landslide. As the years passed, Annie got real sick of living life on the run with a broke-ass bitch, and Charles was none too keen on her weighing him down either. But back in the day, you couldn't just divorce someone willy-nilly, you needed a valid reason for it. So Charles concocted the brilliant scheme of banging a prostitute and then having her testify in court. The plan worked, with the pair successfully divorcing in 1874, and the only downside was syphilis. Whoops. Gito started dabbling in theology again around this time. He published a book called The Truth, which was almost entirely plagiarized directly from John Noyes, the founder of the Oneida community. But despite being a man of God, Gito was still very much a two-time varmint, and moved frequently in the dead of night to keep collectors off his tail. His brother caught wind of this and wrote him a letter basically saying, hey, maybe you should pay your bills now and then so you can be, a functioning member of society. To which Charles replied, and I quote, "Find $7 enclosed. Stick it up your bunghole and wipe your nose on it, and that will remind you of the estimation in which you are held by Charles J. Guiteau." God damn. And to his own brother, the madman. Soon after, he got arrested, bailed out by his sister, lived with her for a few months, attacked her with an axe, went to DC, rambled about religion to anyone who would listen, moved to Boston, got in a boat accident where everyone in his boat was fine, but everyone in the other one fucking died, took this as a sign from God, moved back to New York, and got back into politics in 1880, this time as a Republican. During this campaign, there were two main factions of Republicans, known as the Stalwarts and the Half-Breeds, which sounds like some Tolkien shit, wish we had names like that today. Now, Guiteau considered himself a stalwart, and in a similar vein to his 1872 venture, he wrote a speech to promote stalwart candidate Ulysses S. Grant, who was shooting for his third term. But before he got a chance to deliver the speech, one James A. Garfield took the candidacy completely out of nowhere, beating out both factions single-handedly. He was like, rats, how am I gonna get power handed to me now? So he literally just scribbled out all the references to Grant and replaced them with Garfield and was like, yep, that'll do it. He read this speech all of twice, along with handing out copies to the Republican National Committee. In reality, this really didn't accomplish much, but when Garfield managed to win the election, Guiteau was like, yes! That was entirely me! Garfield is in my supreme debt. As God is my witness, he shall make me a consulate in Vienna or Paris or someplace cool like like that. He went to DC to await his inevitable appointment, but obviously nothing happened. So he started writing letters. A lot of letters. When that didn't work, he started actually stalking both Garfield and the Secretary of State, James Blaine, intercepting them in hotel lobbies, just being like, "Oh, hey, yeah, it's me, the sole person responsible for your success. Say, how about a consulship?" "Alright, you'll get back to me, I get it." "Whoa, haha, what a coincidence. Me again. How's that consulship coming?" At first they simply ignored him, but eventually Blaine snapped, screaming, "Never speak to me again on the Paris consulship as long as you live."
Damn you, Garfield!
I sense a disturbance in the force. Maybe daylight savings just made Monday an hour longer.
Wow, Garfield, that was quite the wisecrack. It's amazing how you managed to keep things fresh year after year.
Burn in hell, beige dog. At this point, Guiteau completely renounced any faith in the current administration, and after a lifetime of clout chasing met only with disappointment, he decided his only option was straight up going postal. He convinced himself that it was now God's will to remove Garfield from this mortal plane in order to put his stalwart vice president, Chester Alan Arthur, into power. When he went to buy a revolver, he was given the choice between a wood grip and an ivory grip. He went with the ivory one for no other reason than he thought it would look cooler in a museum, and on July 2nd, 1881, he ambushed Garfield at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station, shooting him twice in the back and mortally wounding him, all because he wouldn't give him a job. Garfield managed to hang on for 11 weeks before finally dying, which sounds like hell. Today's modern physicians actually believe that Garfield could have easily survived the incident if it weren't for doctors digging through him with unsanitized tools. Hey, modern medicine, thanks for not being worse than literally no medicine. It means a lot. But that didn't stop Guiteau from being formally charged with murder. And that's exactly what he wanted. Matter of fact, Guiteau was over the moon, taking his new nationwide infamy as the fame he always deserved. His trial was just bananas, with Guiteau hurling obscenities at just about everyone there, including his own defense team, and formatting his testimony as an epic poem which he recited in full. He even dictated an autobiography to the New York Herald, which, get this, he ended with a personal ad for a nice Christian lady under 30 years of age. What a baller. When the guilty verdict was read, he called everybody there low consummate jackasses, and on June 30th, 1882, Guiteau smiled and waved to his adoring fans as he was walked to the gallows, where he recited a repetitive, deranged poem he wrote that morning, which was performed in a high-pitched falsetto voice, since it was written in the point of view of a child. He asked for a full orchestra to play during the reading, which I don't have to tell you that went nowhere, and promptly thereafter, he was hung. When the gallows dropped, people were probably like, "Ugh, Jesus, it's finally over. I just came here for a nice little execution. They subject me to all that? Oh, my money back, frankly." So it just goes to show, you can't always get what you want. Unless that thing is getting everyone to hate you, that's extraordinarily easy. But for everything else, you're gonna need a combination of hard work and know-how. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and I oop and I oop. Hey adults. So, most of us are aware of at least one animal companion to the Commander-in-Chief. All but 3 presidents have owned some kind of pet during their term, and there's good reason for that. Not only does a lovable mutt serve to humanize an otherwise larger-than-life figure, but their cute antics can also be a great distraction when needed. Huh? Drone strikes. Never heard of her. Hey, we're doing a photo op with this dog that shares a name with my vice president's son, cause you know, that's not weird at all. But as it turns out, dogs and cats are just the tip of the iceberg. There have been a lot of quadrupedal occupants of the White House, even without Miss Lewinsky. So today we'll be going through just a few of the more interesting ones. Going back to the beginning, Washington had critters galore, including 4 black and tan slur hounds that he named Drunkard, Taster, Tippler, and Tipsy. They sound like if Santa's reindeer were all alcoholics, which would be a shame because Rudolph's red nose would no longer be of note. John Adams had 3 dogs that presumably spanned the alignment chart, being named Juno, Mark, and Satan respectively. Not a joke. Jefferson kept around 40 sheep during his presidency, one of which was a 4-horned Shetland ram. Though nameless, said ram soon became famous for killing a young boy on White House grounds. Rather than immediately destroying the animal as we'd expect today, Jefferson just had it moved back to Monticello. It was eventually put down, but only after it single-handedly killed several other rams at the estate, which just goes to show how Jefferson operated. Random child, not the best optics, but that can be forgiven. But my own property, that's a bridge too far, Rambo. John Quincy Adams' wife Louisa practiced sericulture, which is a fun word for silkworm keeping. As a side note, sericulture has been going on since at least 3630 BC, which is kinda nutty, cause that means we domesticated worms to turn their goo into clothes before we figured out how to ride a horse. Jackson had an African gray parrot named Poll, short for Polly, that would apparently curse like a sailor, probably thanks to the teachings of Old Hickory himself. Having outlived its owner, Poll ended up being removed from Jackson's funeral service after unleashing so much profanity that guests found it genuinely upsetting. He also kept roosters for cockfighting, which was acceptable at the time and still far from the worst thing he's done morally. During Van Buren's term, the Sultan of Oman sent a variety of gifts to the president, among them being a pair of tiger cubs. He was like, "This is badass," and desperately wanted to keep them in the White House. But the dickheads in Congress asserted that, due to a specific constitutional provision, gifts to the presidential office weren't for the man himself, but for the people. Van Buren said, "Fuck the people, them's my tigers," and got into a legal battle with the legislator over the issue, which he eventually lost. The tigers were subsequently sent to a zoo, and over 20 years later, Van Buren died of pneumonia, completely unrelated to this incident. Although Andrew Johnson had no du jour pets, he did befriend a family of mice he found in his bedroom, feeding them flour and grain and referring to them as the little fellows. It's an oddly wholesome thing to hear from someone who essentially set the trajectory for the next 100 years of black disenfranchisement. Mr. Johnson, we still have a country to rebuild. Get out of my room, I'm getting rat-pilled. Taft had 2 cows during his term. The first of them was named Mooly Wooly, and she died a year and a half in after, quote, eating too many oats. Mooly was promptly replaced by the far more dignified Pauline Wayne. She was a real dime of a heifer, which led Taft to show her off at the International Dairymen's Expo in Milwaukee. In order to get her there, she was transported in a private car attached to a train headed for the stockyards in Chicago. But a switch crew mixed up which car was hers, leading to 2 days of frantic telegraphs asking where the president's cow had gone. She only narrowly avoided the slaughterhouse when a couple of attendants at the stockyard recognized Pauline for what she was, and all was well. This next one requires a little background info. So the traditional Thanksgiving dinner was and remains a significant yearly ceremony for the first family. For half a century, from 1873 to 1913, the duty of providing the presidential turkey belonged to one Horace Vose, a private turkey farmer based in Rhode Island. After his death, though, things turned into a free-for-all, with numerous farmers sending unsolicited turkeys, both alive and dead, in an attempt to secure a position as the next annual caterer for the White House. Nobody was decided on for a decade, and upon assuming office in 1923, Calvin Coolidge found the volume of birds showing up at his doorstep alarming, and put an end to the tradition that year, instead opting to buy his own turkey. But in 1925, after much outside pressure, he caved, and was immediately flooded with not only turkey, but a variety of increasingly exotic animals to eat. Among them was a live raccoon he received the following year. Coolidge was, at the time, blissfully unaware of the intricate dance performed on the palate between forward yet ephemeral gaminess and heady seductive musk when one submits himself to the experience of a toothsome raccoon fillet, and as such he decided to keep it as a pet instead. Dubbed Rebecca, the creature soon came to be a core member of the Coolidge family. She ate as well as any of them, being fed things like shrimp and persimmons, and she was particularly fond of eggs. Given free reign over the house, Rebecca's hobbies reportedly included unscrewing light bulbs, uprooting houseplants, and playing with wet bars of soap in the bathtub. She was so beloved that she even had her own treehouse built for her in the White House yard. When the Coolidges made way for the Hoovers, Rebecca was forced to vacate her post, but the new first family soon found that they had a squatter on their hands. The new tenant of Rebecca's treehouse was a wild opossum who, rather than being evicted, was adopted by the Hoovers in a similar fashion to Rebecca, albeit from a farther distance, mostly just saying, yeah, that's ours now. He was given the name Billy Possum, which is a reference to our old friend Taft. See, as the man following Teddy Roosevelt in the White House, Taft had some big shoes to fill. So during his term, some enterprising young dumbasses approached Taft with what they claimed would be the sequel to the teddy bear. They called it Billy Possum, which is itself a reference to the president's fondness of possum and taters, a dish he famously requested at a banquet in Atlanta as an act of goodwill towards the South and its culture. Taft found the idea amusing enough that he gave the green light, and many thousands of Billy Possums were produced. Given their total obscurity today, it's clear these toys were a massive flop, and there's a few reasons for that. For one, trying to force fads at all is like trying to push water uphill, but also, the story of Roosevelt refusing to shoot a tied-up bear has a bit more symbolic poetry to it than, it's a possum cause he like possum, he a fat boy, eat him up good. Couple that with the constant character assassination that the opossum as an animal has received from ignorant urbanites, and it becomes obvious that this thing was doomed from the start. But anyway, that's where the Hoover opossum got his name, and his exploits were pretty limited outside of temporarily filling in as a mascot of a local high school. In 1961, Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gifted a dog to the Kennedys, named Pushinka, or Fluffy. And while it is normally rude to look a gift dog in the mouth, an exception can be made when the single biggest threat to the free world insists that said dog should live with the president. Pushinka was x-rayed, put through metal detectors, and given ultrasounds out of fear that someone implanted her with a listening device. Fortunately, though there may be bugs in some of you mugs, there ain't no bugs in she, and Pushinka remained a Kennedy for the rest of her days. While truthfully, the gift was likely given as a simple act of good faith designed to reduce Cold War tensions, Pushinka was also the daughter of Strelka, who, during Sputnik 5, became the first mammal to make it back from space alive. So I'd like to think of it as more of a passive-aggressive space race flex. Like, yeah, our astronanimals are so alive, they're making babies even. Hope looking at this one constantly reminds you of where you stand. With that, I hope you found this highlight reel enlightening. It feels good to know that while Congress has always been a zoo, so too has the White House at times. That's all for today. Till next time, I'm Sam and Nella, and you make my girlhood tremble.